snow howled through the Montana wilderness, blanketing every path and pine in bone-deep silence. Mason Blackwood trudged forward, rifle slung across his shoulder, his breath freezing into brittle frost against his beard. The ex-Marine had long since learned the rhythm of the forest, its stillness, its sudden dangers. But this storm came with no rhythm. Just white. White that swallowed the world whole. Then came the sound. A sharp, trembling whimper. Not human, not weather. Pain. Mason turned boots sinking into the snowdrift and followed the fragile cry through a thicket of fallen trees. Beneath a collapsed pine huddled in the half-light was a bundle of black fur. A pup. Its leg was clamped in a rusted steel trap, blood soaking into the snow in wide halos. "Easy," Mason murmured, kneeling. The creature bared tiny teeth in a feeble threat, but made no move to escape. Its eyes, amber-piercing, too knowing, met his. Not with fear, not quite, with something else, something almost human. He tore off his gloves despite the cold fingers numbing as he forced the trap open. The pup didn't resist. It just watched. Wrapped in Mason's spare thermal, it nestled into his chest as he pushed through the blizzard. The weight of it should have been a burden. But as the storm worsened and his limp flared, the creature pressed into him as if offering strength. 5 hours later, the cabin emerged from the white haze. Haley's face blanched at the door. She helped Mason to the fire, peeling away his frozen coat until the bloodied bundle spilled onto the hearthrug. "A pup," she gasped. "What happened to it?" Trap, Mason rasped, teeth chattering. "Couldn't leave it." Haley knelt beside the animal, gentle fingers brushing over the mangled limb. "He won't make it without surgery. We can't get to town, not in this storm. Then we bring the town to us." 3 hours later, old Dr. Calloway arrived. Snow clung to his beard like frost on stone. He didn't speak at first, just looked at the pup, then away. In their kitchen-turned-operating room, Mason held the sleeping pup steady while Calloway amputated the ruined leg. Blood on towels, breath held. Silence broken only by Haley's whispered encouragements. "What is he?" she asked afterward. Calloway didn't meet her eyes. "Some kind of shepherd." "Maybe." They named him Shadow. 3 days later, he was gone. Only bloodied bandages remained. A single set of 3-legged tracks led into the forest. For weeks after Shadow vanished, Mason scoured the woods in widening circles. The snow had long since filled in the trail, and every animal track blurred into the next. Still, he searched. Not out of duty, he'd done that often enough in the deserts of war, but because something in that animal had spoken to him. Not with words, with eyes. Haley, though heartbroken, moved on with her quiet strength. She painted again, laughed with her students. Mason noticed she never removed the clean towel Shadow had once slept on near the fire. Instead, she folded it neatly, placed it on a shelf, and said nothing. The seasons passed, then years. Mason's limp grew worse with time, but he welcomed the ache it kept him grounded. Haley's illness arrived in a whisper, not a shout. First fatigue, then bruises that lingered too long. By the time the diagnosis came, their lives had already begun to shrink. Pinarest, the tiny town that had never truly embraced them, offered no help. Sheriff Walker's eyes held judgment behind every word. But it was Calloway who kept visiting, bringing teas and tinctures, never explaining why he always looked out the window when he arrived. Then came the winter, 7 years after Shadow. Mason woke early, his routine rooted in survival, splitting logs, checking traps, keeping Haley warm. But that morning, frost clung to more than windows. Outside, perfectly formed prints circled their home, massive paw marks, far larger than any dog. deep impressions evenly spaced, pacing, watching. They led nowhere. They simply encircled the cabin. That same day, Tanner from the hunting lodge appeared face flushed with rage. "Your dog killed my best hounds last night," he accused. "Big black thing. Half the town's seen it now." "I don't have a dog," Mason replied, but the chill in his spine said otherwise. That night, Mason retrieved his old military trail cameras and mounted them along the tree line. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was preparation. Something was out there, and it wasn't just passing through. 2 weeks later, the camera clicked and captured a ghost. Amber eyes, black coat, 3 legs, a memory made flesh. Shadow had returned. The image haunted Mason. The massive black wolf stood framed by the game camera's flash eyes, aglow with an eerie intelligence. One rear leg was shorter, limped, and on its chest a white patch, shaped exactly like the marking Shadow bore as a pup. It wasn't just a wolf. It was him. Mason said nothing to Haley at first. He wanted to believe it was coincidence, that the image didn't mean what his gut told him. But then came the second photo, then a third, always from a distance, always circling, never approaching. Shadow had returned, but not for comfort, for something else. Haley noticed his unease. "You're brooding," she teased gently, her voice thinner now, her cheeks hollowed by treatment. Another broken fence. Something like that, Mason lied. Then came the kill. Tanner's 2 prized hounds torn apart on the edge of the forest, their bodies left untouched, as if destroyed for territory, not hunger. Rumors erupted like wildfire. A black devil wolf, a cursed beast. Mason said nothing, but his blood ran colder than the snow outside. He tried to dismiss it, but instincts forged in Afghanistan wouldn't quiet. Tracks circled the cabin nightly, perfect loops, never random, never careless. He began waking in the middle of the night, breath held, scanning the darkness beyond the windows. One morning, Haley broke the silence. "I think something's watching us." Mason froze. "Why do you say that?" "Sometimes when you're gone," she said, eyes distant. "I see movement at the forest's edge, just beyond the clearing. It doesn't scare me. I feel safer." That was the moment Mason knew. Shadow wasn't just wandering. He was guarding. The next day, Mason followed the tracks deep into the national forest. They led to a hidden ravine, half buried in snow. There, arranged with haunting precision, were 3 deer carcasses laid in a semicircle. The unusable remains had been buried with care. At the center, a smooth stone carved with deliberate, unnatural scratches. Mason knelt, touched the marks. Behind him, a presence stirred. He looked up and locked eyes with the massive wolf on the ridge. Shadow. The years hadn't dulled the animal's gaze. It was as if time had only sharpened it. "Shadow," Mason whispered. The wolf's ears twitched. Then, without a sound, he turned and vanished into the trees. That night, Mason told Haley everything about the tracks, the game camera, the arranged carcasses, the way Shadow had looked at him. He expected disbelief, but Haley only nodded as if she already knew. "I've felt him," she said quietly, "especially on my worst days, as if someone or something was watching over me." Mason didn't know what frightened him more, that a wild creature might be showing loyalty, or that he was beginning to believe it had purpose. But others in town didn't see mystery. They saw threat. Frederick Tanner returned, fists clenched and rifle slung. "I don't care what you're hiding," he barked. "Something out there is killing livestock. My best hounds are gone. Next, it'll be kids." The sheriff began circling too, parking along the access road for hours, pretending to check in on Haley. But Mason knew what he was really watching for. Shadow. And then came proof no one could explain away. A child went missing, 10-year-old Abigail Foster, during a school hike in the forest. Panic erupted. Search parties formed. Snow began to fall. Mason joined the hunt, tracking in silence with Ranger Thompson. Miles from the main search, Mason spotted something chilling. Tiny child footprints overlapped by massive wolf tracks. But the pattern wasn't predatory. It was protective. They followed the trail to a hollow log. Inside, Abigail was safe, wrapped in an old jacket. Calm, breathing slow. The big dog showed me where to hide, she told them later. He pushed me into the log and brought me the coat. Even hardened men fell silent. But not everyone was grateful. Some saw it as a lucky break. Others blamed the wolf for leading the child astray in the first place. Mason, though, had no doubts anymore. Shadow wasn't just remembering. He was choosing. Haley's health began to shift subtly at first. Fewer fevers, better appetite. Her blood work showed small improvements. And always during those weeks, Shadow's presence grew closer. Mason would find perfect kills, a rabbit placed neatly at his workshop door. Unmauled, fresh. "He's feeding us, Haley," whispered eyes wide with wonder. "The way we fed him." Mason didn't reply, because he'd already started believing. Shadow came at night, never crossing into the cabin's light, but always near. Mason would wake in darkness and feel it like a pressure against the windows, a breath just beyond the glass. In the morning, the snow would be marked again. Large, deliberate prints. One missing leg. A perfect circuit around the home. Sometimes Haley saw him too. "He stands at the edge of the clearing," she said one morning, hands curled around a mug of tea, face still pale from her treatments. "When I wave, he disappears." Mason began noticing a pattern. On days when Shadow was seen, Haley's symptoms eased. When Shadow vanished for a few nights, her fatigue worsened. Coincidence, maybe. But Mason's instincts told him this connection ran deeper than medicine. One February morning, Mason stepped outside to find a rabbit freshly killed neck, broken cleanly laid gently on the steps of his workshop. No blood, no bite marks, just offered. It happened again, then again. Always when their freezer was low. Always just enough. "He's taking care of us," Haley whispered. Mason tried to ground himself in logic in the military mindset that had kept him alive. But the evidence defied explanation. No wild animal acted like this. Not after 7 years. Not with this precision. Not with such devotion. Meanwhile, the town whispered louder. More dogs disappeared. Livestock vanished from farms that had publicly called for the black wolf's death. Yet never a drop of blood left behind. No signs of struggle. Just silence. Some saw a monster. Others a myth. But everyone agreed on one thing. The wolf wasn't normal. Sheriff Walker increased patrols. Hunters like Tanner began organizing weekend expeditions. Still, Shadow stayed one step ahead. Game cameras captured him often, now bold standing still, as if daring them to see. And in some images, Mason noticed something disturbing, a raw circular wound on Shadow's shoulder. Clean. Not from a fight. Something surgical. Someone had tried to tag him, or worse, control him. Mason's dread deepened. This wasn't just about a rogue wolf anymore. There were eyes beyond the town, watching, hunting, and somehow Haley's survival was bound to this animal they once saved from a trap. The signs grew stranger. In the ravine where Shadow had once stood, Mason found more carefully arranged kills. Deer laid with reverence awful buried bones, aligned. And at the center, always a stone or tree, marked with scratches. Not random. Patterned. Shadow wasn't just surviving. He was thinking. When Mason discovered a small metallic object buried in the snow near one of the sites, his hands trembled. It was a tracking chip, military grade, bloodied with strands of black fur still stuck to it. Shadow had ripped it from his own flesh. The implications crashed down like avalanche. Back at the cabin, Haley stirred from her fever with a whisper. "He's healing me, Mason." Her voice was so certain it frightened him. Mason drove straight to Dr. Calloway, the old vet, who had always looked at Shadow with eyes that knew more than they should. This time, Mason didn't ask. He demanded. The truth unraveled slowly, painfully. Shadow was no ordinary wolf. He belonged to a nearly extinct bloodline, a subspecies of North American black wolves, once believed gone. Bigger, smarter, bonded for life. They're rare beyond imagining, Calloway said, eyes shadowed. And some believe medicinal. Mason's breath caught. What do you mean? There are compounds in their blood glands, saliva. Early research shows promise immune regulation, even cancer resistance. Mason thought of Haley. The sudden strength, the remission, the timing. Is he curing her? I can't say that, Calloway replied. But I can say this. Since Shadow returned, her numbers have improved. Calloway admitted to blending teas from plants marked by the wolf. Off the books. Desperate remedies. I had to try, the vet said quietly. I've seen what they can do. That night, Haley stood on the porch, wrapped in her robe, eyes fixed on the tree line. He came, she whispered when Mason joined her. He looked right at me. She turned to her husband with a trembling smile. Mason, he's not just protecting us. He remembers. Spring came late to Pinarest, thawing the snow just enough to stir tensions buried beneath. With each new sunrise, the stakes rose quietly like a rising flood. Haley's health began to slip again. The doctors in Missoula were less optimistic this time. Her cancer had returned with a vengeance, and treatments became harsher. But Mason noticed a strange pattern. On the days Shadow appeared, his silhouette visible near the clearing, his paw prints circling the cabin. Haley had fewer symptoms. Less pain, more clarity. And then came the bull. The prized animal of the Miller farm was found dead, throat torn cleanly, no blood trail. The town exploded in outrage. The black wolf was blamed instantly, but Mason knew better. Shadow had never attacked without reason, never touched humans, never crossed the line. But someone he realized wanted it to look that way. Ranger Thompson confirmed Mason's fears. Tanner's gathering men, dogs, rifles. They're calling it a mountain lion hunt, but they're after Shadow. Then he added something colder. And I think someone's funding it. Later that week, in the same ravine where Shadow left offerings, Mason discovered evidence. Human tracks, ATV tires, a second tracking chip. Clean, intact, hidden in the earth. They were back. Whoever had marked Shadow the first time was still watching. That night, Mason confronted Dr. Calloway again, this time placing the bloodied chip on the kitchen table. Tell me everything, he said. The old vet's hands trembled as he sat. There's a research group, Calloway admitted. They work with the university tracking rare wolves. But this isn't their equipment. This is private, corporate, pharmaceutical. Mason stared. They want to capture him. They want what's in him. And if they can't take him alive, they'll take samples. Bones, glands, blood. Haley entered mid-conversation. She looked exhausted, her face gray under the kitchen light, but her voice didn't waver. Then we protect him, she said. Mason turned to her. He's protecting us. And deep down, he finally believed it. Shadow wasn't just a wolf. He was kin. Tensions in Pinarest crackled like dry pine before lightning. The town split into factions, those who saw the black wolf as a threat, and those who spoke of him with quiet awe. Most stayed silent. But Tanner didn't. He rallied 6 men, armed them, gave them a target. Then came the message no one could deny. 3 elk slaughtered but untouched were found at Carson Ridge, arranged in a pattern. a single letter H scratched into the dirt nearby, the initial of Haley's name. Sheriff Walker came to the Blackwoods' door the next morning, grim-faced, and flanked by Tanner's truck and other unfamiliar vehicles. "Tell me, Blackwood," he said, "how does a wolf learn to spell?" Mason didn't answer, because part of him wondered the same thing. But it didn't matter. The hunt was set. Armed men trained dogs, and Walker himself, heading into the national forest. Shadow had crossed their invisible line, and they wanted him dead. Mason begged to go with them, not to help, but to protect. At first, Walker refused, then relented reluctantly. Haley, pale and weak, insisted on coming too. "I won't sit here while they kill him," she whispered, pulling on her warmest coat. "This is about more than just us now." So they climbed into the sheriff's cruiser and joined the convoy into the trees. Hunting dogs whined in wire crates. Rifles clinked against steel truck beds. Mason kept quiet, watching the forest blur past. When they reached the trail's end, the air had changed. Still, heavy, watching. They released the hounds. 2 refused to run. The third, a scarred coonhound, bolted ahead, only to return minutes later whimpering beneath a tree. "What the hell?" Tanner muttered. Even his seasoned dog was afraid. Then came the howl, low, deep, not like any wolf Mason had heard before. It echoed through the trees like thunder under skin. The men drew together instinctively. "That's no ordinary predator," one of them whispered. "No," Mason murmured. "That's Shadow." He stepped away from the group and raised his voice low and sure. "Shadow, it's me." And from the brush ahead, the great black wolf emerged, massive, silent. Eyes locked, not on Mason, but on Haley. Shadow stepped fully into the clearing, his coat glinting like oil in the sunlight, muscles rippling beneath midnight fur. He was larger than Mason remembered, shoulder high to a man's waist, and yet somehow calm. His eyes scanned the rifles, then settled on Haley. She gasped. "He remembers me." The hunters didn't care. Tanner raised his rifle. "Don't matter what it is, it's dead." Mason moved fast, placing himself between Tanner and the wolf. "Lower it." "Move," Blackwood Miller barked. "That thing killed my bull." "You saw it happen," Mason shot back. Or just needed someone to blame. The standoff burned in silence. Then came new voices, ranger trucks, federal vehicles. Out from the trail strode Ranger Thompson, 4 wildlife officers, and a tall, gray-haired man, cradling a tranquilizer rifle. "Stand down," Thompson shouted. "That animal is protected under federal jurisdiction." Confusion rippled through the hunting party. "Protected," Walker barked. "We had permission." "New orders," Thompson said hard. "Critical information just came in. He's not to be harmed." Dr. Ellis Harmon, the university biologist, stepped forward, eyes fixed on Shadow. "He's perfect," he whispered. "We need to tag and study him." "No," Mason said coldly. "You don't." But as the argument built, Mason noticed something. Shadow wasn't watching the men. He was watching Haley. Then, to Mason's horror, she stepped forward toward the beast, her gait slow but steady. "Haley," Mason shouted. "Stay back." Walker reached for her arm. In a blur, Shadow placed himself between them. No growl, no snarl, just a line drawn in the snow. "Don't touch her." Walker stumbled back, hand on his sidearm. "Back up," Mason warned the group. "He won't let anyone near her." Then Haley did the unthinkable. She knelt beside the wolf. And he let her. Her hand reached up, trembling, and Shadow dipped his head, allowing her fingers to brush between his ears. "It's okay," she whispered. Not to the men, not to Mason, but to Shadow himself. Mason saw it in that moment. This wasn't an animal protecting a human. This was family. The loyalty wasn't instinct. It was choice. And it had been forged 7 winters ago, by fire, by blood, by mercy. Shadow stood utterly still beneath Haley's touch, his massive form bracing her fragile body like a pillar. Around them, armed men lowered their weapons in uncertainty, caught between fear and awe. But then Haley gasped. Her fingers clenched at her chest. Her lips parted in silent pain, and suddenly she collapsed. Haley Mason was at her side in a heartbeat, dropping to his knees, arms wrapping around her before she hit the ground. Her skin was ice, her breath shallow, her heart racing wildly, then slowing with terrifying speed. "It's her heart," Mason said, voice sharp with panic. "Side effect of the chemo. We need help now." Walker radioed for medevac immediately. In the chaos, no one noticed the hunter's retreat. No one but Shadow. The wolf didn't growl. He didn't move. But his amber eyes tracked every hand, every gesture, as if daring them to come closer. When Mason lifted Haley into his arms, Shadow fell into step beside him. Not a threat, an escort. Each time Mason stumbled, Shadow nudged gently against his hip, steadying him. They emerged from the forest into clearing, where trucks waited, and the helicopter began its descent. 20 minutes out, Walker called. "She doesn't have 20, Mason snapped. He laid Haley gently in the back of the cruiser, wiping sweat from her forehead. Her breathing faltered, her lips pale. Still, Shadow remained nearby, guarding the door, ignoring the voices, the weapons, the rising wind. When the paramedics arrived, they rushed toward the car, only to freeze, as Shadow growled low in his throat, warning without threat. "Back off," Mason said. "He won't let anyone near her yet." And so the wolf stood sentinel beside the woman who had once saved him. When the stretcher finally lifted her into the chopper, Shadow followed to the tree line, then sat, watching, waiting. As the helicopter rose, blades slicing the air, Mason caught a final glimpse of the wolf below, still silent and staring at the sky, as though watching something far more than a machine, watching his family leave and letting them go. The hospital lights were cold, too clean, too still. Haley survived the emergency, but the diagnosis that followed crushed what hope Mason had left. The cancer hadn't returned. It had spread. Quietly, aggressively, a masked storm under the surface. The oncologist's words were final. 6 months, maybe. It's time to consider comfort care. Mason didn't cry. He nodded, thanked the doctor, and sat by Haley's bedside for 3 sleepless nights, listening to the machine that kept rhythm with her breaths. Eventually, Calloway appeared. "You need rest," the old vet said gently. "Go home for 1 night. I'll drive you back tomorrow." Mason relented. When they pulled up to the cabin, the porch was buried in leaves, firewood scattered, windows fogged over from disuse. The place already felt abandoned. But something else caught Mason's eye. Tracks. Massive, deliberate prints circled the home. Fresh. 3-legged. "He's been here every night," Calloway said softly. "Hasn't missed a single one." Inside, nothing was touched. No broken doors, no torn curtains. Just the quiet presence of a guardian who never stepped inside. Shadow had kept watch while Mason was away. At the hearth, the towel Haley once folded for the pup still sat on the shelf untouched, as if waiting. Mason sat heavily by the fire and exhaled for the first time in weeks. Outside, dusk painted the trees in fading gold. Somewhere beyond the tree line, Mason knew Shadow was watching, not for threats, but for the man who once saved him and the woman who still needed him. And in that silence, Mason understood something deeper than grief. This wasn't a goodbye. It was a promise.